And thanks everyone for joining us this evening and spending some time to learn more about some of, the tips and tools we have for community engagement in local wetland conservation and why it's so important. Uh, and appropriately, today is World Frog Day, so a good day to be talking about wetlands, the ecosystems that they depend so much on, and also the first day of spring. So nice to be hopefully looking forward to some warmer days ahead, even though where I'm at, it was snowing a little bit earlier on. Hopefully moving my next slide along. I'm going to open this session with a land acknowledgement for the area I'm joining from, which is now known as the City of Waterloo. And as we all know, the lands and waters of Turtle Island, now known as North America, have been and continue to be inhabited and stewarded by diverse Indigenous peoples since time immemorial. Waterloo specifically is situated within the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Attawandaron people, and is now a home to many diverse Indigenous peoples. The area is party to the Between the Lakes Treaty 3 agreement, encompassing about 1.2 million hectares of land between Lakes Erie and Ontario, and the Haldeman Treaty Agreement, encompassing an area of land extending about 6 miles or just over 9.5 kilometers on either side of the Grand River. The area is also party to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples, extending to all inhabitants of the land to peacefully share the land, or the dish, by taking only what we need, being sure to keep the dish clean, and always leaving enough for others, including future generations. I'm grateful to be able to live, work, and play in an area that has long been stewarded under the principles of the dish with one spoon, and recognize my own role and responsibility in upholding these principles. I also want to take a moment to thank the numerous organizations, that have supported various aspects of Ontario Nature's wetlands conservation efforts, and the resources that we'll be talking about today, including Transport Canada's Commemoration Fund for the victims of Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 tragedy, the RBC Foundation, K.M. Hunter Charitable Foundation, the McLean Foundation, IA Financial Group, and the Community Foundation of Greater Peterborough. And a little more about who you'll be hearing from today. I'm Sarah, as Leslie said, and I'm the Conservation Campaigns Coordinator at Ontario Nature. I joined the organization in May of 2022, right after completing my master's in environmental sciences, and have had a lead role in our wetlands campaign pretty much ever since. You'll also be hearing from our Conservation Campaigns and Advocacy Manager, Shane Moffat, who joined Ontario Nature earlier this year. And Shane has extensive campaigning experience spanning a range of different topics, and we're really excited to have him on the team to help lead our wetlands and endangered species initiatives. To the next slide here. So during today's webinar, Shane and I will be introducing two new Ontario Nature resources, our Wetlands Story Map and Wetlands Conservation Wise Practice Report, which might be able to help support some community-led wetland conservation efforts. Oops, so sorry about that. I've gone ahead here. In doing that, we hope everyone will be able to walk away from tonight's session feeling prepared to communicate with others about the importance of protecting wetlands, feeling more informed about the tools you could encourage local decision makers to use to better protect wetlands, and hopefully feeling more hopeful about the opportunities there are for community-led initiatives to protect wetlands at the local level. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen for a moment and pass things over to Shane.
Thanks so much, Sarah.
Thanks.
And it's wonderful to see everyone. Thanks so much for the warm introduction, Sarah. And I'll start my slides now. Okay, so welcome to Ontario's wonderful wetlands, and a very happy World Frog Day to everyone joining us. And really just a big thanks to everyone joining us this evening after a long day. My name is Shane, as Sarah mentioned, and I'm the Campaigns and Advocacy Manager with Ontario Nature. And I've been in this role for about 2 months, but I've been working to protect nature for about 20 years now. And I'm really delighted to be speaking with everyone here this evening. Hopefully we can have a great discussion. Okay, so first and foremost, it's really important to acknowledge that wetlands, as with other natural ecosystems, are indigenous cultural landscapes. And Ontario Nature recognizes that these wetlands are the territories of many nations since time immemorial, and our work to conserve them is inseparable from restoring indigenous governance, rights, and knowledge on the land. Wetlands are vital, and here's why. And don't worry, it's not all going to be as much text as this. But just to kind of ground us in why wetlands are so important for people, for species at risk, for the climate, just to give us a bit of a sense of that, I'll go through a couple of facts of why they are so significant. So wetlands sustain life all around the world and right here in Ontario, but they're at the forefront of a global ecological crisis, and they're facing growing pressures from land conversion, climate change, and other disturbance. Ontario holds about 6% of all the wetlands on Earth, which is a really, really enormous number. About 25% of Canada's wetlands are found in Ontario. Southern Ontario alone contains about 1 million hectares of wetland ecosystems. That's roughly the size of Jamaica. The Hudson's Bay lowlands of Northern Ontario encompass about 20 million hectares of wetlands, and that's larger than Senegal and about the same size of Belarus. I learned recently when I was looking this up. 8 wetlands in Ontario have been recognized as being internationally significant areas for biodiversity, called Ramsar sites. There are also natural climate solutions, and we'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. And as Sarah mentioned, Ontario Nature has just launched a great new tool on our website, which is an interactive story map for youth. And it's a youth guide to wetlands and why they matter. So if you're interested in any of the information that I share today, please check it out on our website. It's a really wonderful resource with interactive tools, images, a lot of the facts and statistics we provided here, but presented in a really interactive and storytelling format. And I think it'd be a wonderful tool for anyone of any age, frankly, who's interested in learning more about wetlands. It's a really wonderful resource. So a little bit more on wetlands as a natural climate solution or a nature-based climate solution. What we mean by that is that wetlands and Ontario's wetlands are critical in responding to the interrelated crises of climate change and biodiversity loss. And that by protecting wetlands, we can protect multiple values at the same time. And there's real bang for our buck. So wetlands contain 20 to 30% of global soil carbon, up to 38% of damages and costs caused by floods in urban areas are reduced by wetlands, and at least 20% of Ontario's species, Ontario's species at risk rely on wetland habitats. So let's look a little bit more at biodiversity. Wetlands, as we know, provide critical habitat for plants and wildlife, including a number of species at risk of extinction. To put this in a global context, fully 1/4 of all freshwater animals are now at risk of extinction. That's playing out right here in Ontario, where at least 20% of provincially listed species at risk depend on wetland habitats for their survival, meaning they play a key role in preserving biodiversity in the province. And unfortunately, and we had a press release out on this today with some interesting media coverage, the Blanchard's cricket frog is set to become officially locally extinct in Ontario. Looking at a bit now at turtles, it's not just frogs who are in trouble. Unfortunately, turtles are also in trouble. And all 8 turtle species native to Ontario are considered species at risk. For example, the spotted turtle that you can see in front of you here, really just a gorgeous turtle. So this is a small endangered turtle that lives in ponds, marshes, and bogs across southern Ontario. And the most serious threat that they face is habitat loss. A bit more difficult to say is the no less brilliant prothonotary warbler. And it's an incredible, brilliant yellow-orange bird. And I think I may have seen it in the wild myself, but I'm not 100% certain. It inhabits mature deciduous swamp forests in southwestern Ontario. It's classified as endangered, and it's also primarily threatened by habitat loss. Now, zooming in a little bit at the micro level, we can see here Hind's emerald dragonfly. And this is a green-eyed dragonfly, which lives in groundwater-fed wetlands. And it preys on small flying insects like mosquitoes that we all love so much in the spring and summertime. It's also classified as endangered and has a very limited remaining habitat and has been reported in Ontario only in and around the Minising wetland near Barrie. So it's not just animals at risk, it's plants as well, unfortunately. And the eastern prairie fringed orchid that we can see here is a rare and endangered orchid that inhabits the fens and swamps in southern Ontario. It's threatened again by habitat loss and possibly by a decline in the number of insect pollinators. It's also found only in a handful of sites in Canada, all of them in southern Ontario. But it's not just endangered species that benefit from wetlands. Wetlands are also incredible flood fighters. What we mean by that is that wetlands fight the impacts of floods by soaking up excess water like a sponge and then releasing that water slowly over time. By doing so, wetlands can reduce flood damages by 29 to 39% in southern Ontario. And that protects human communities and the surrounding ecosystems. Even wetlands as small as 2 hectares can have a really significant impact, collecting water from an area up to 70 times its size. Many peatlands contain sphagnum moss, which can store water equivalent to 20 times its weight. And this also contributes to rehydrating land during dry periods, mitigating not just floods, but the impacts of droughts. Southern Ontario's wetlands, and you can see a note to myself, define exactly what I mean, are estimated to reduce flood-related damages by 29 to 38%, as I mentioned. Did you know that wetlands act like giant sponges during heavy rainfall events and reducing the associated damage? And maybe just to move to the next slide there to give you a visual example of what that looks like. It's interesting for me. I've been listening to people around the area that I live talk about how flooding is more and more part of their experience. And I'm hearing a lot of people talk about the reasons for those floods. And I think that there's a really important growing awareness of the connection between the floods that we're seeing and the destruction of the natural world and wetlands around us. And this illustration here, which is really fantastic one by the author that I've provided there, I think just really gives a really kind of straightforward, accessible example of what exactly is causing those floods. Okay, so turning to carbon stores and carbon storage. So we've talked about how important wetlands are from a biodiversity perspective, how they help us with flood prevention, but they also help us mitigate climate change. And when we look at the carbon storage of wetlands, to give you a sense of how that works, slower rates of decomposition in wetlands allow them to store significant amounts of carbon over time. And that actually reduces the impacts of climate change by keeping greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, a bit like a green shield. Left undisturbed, they're able to store carbon for hundreds of thousands of years. And scientists actually estimate that about 29 billion tons of carbon are stored in Ontario's wetlands. And that's the equivalent of taking all of the vehicles in Canada off the road for 1,000 years. And the Hudson's Bay lowlands alone store as much carbon as a third of the province's total carbon emissions. Wetlands are able to store more carbon than forests and grassland ecosystems, and it's critical to protect these carbon storage superstars so they can continue to store carbon and reduce the intensity of climate change for future generations. But they're not just carbon stores, and they're not just important from a climate mitigation perspective, they're also vulnerable to the impacts of climate change as well. So in terms of some of the climate impacts, wetlands are particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change because the seasonality really drives their water levels, the water quality, along with other ecological processes. And to give you a sense, black ash, for example, is an endangered wetland tree species that is particularly vulnerable to climate change. As any changes in the temperature, changes in the temperature and precipitation that we're witnessing under a changing climate, those changes favor the survival of invasive pests such as the emerald ash borer, which we're hearing more and more about in the news as a real threat to forests, and wetlands. They also purify our water. So wetlands are able to filter out pollutants and excess nutrients from the water. And that has earned them the reputation of nature's kidneys. In Southern Ontario, wetlands provided over $4 billion in water filtration services, such as the removal of sediment and phosphorus, and helping to keep lakes and rivers clean. The aquatic plants found in wetlands slow down water. They slow down the flow of water, allowing nutrients and sediments to settle in the soil or to be absorbed by plant roots before the water moves into larger watercourses or lakes and rivers. Marshes in particular are very effective at purifying water due to their large water content and the really abundant plant life that we find in marshes. But it's not all good news, unfortunately. Wetlands are at risk, and the causes of their some of the risks to wetlands include development and land conversion, government policy, industrial agriculture, pollution, drainage and altered hydrology, and climate change. So to give you a brief history of wetland loss in Ontario. In a nutshell, wetland loss is occurring at an alarming rate in Ontario. Southern Ontario has lost over 70% of wetlands since the onset of colonialism and the arrival of European settlers. Losses have continued to occur since then, with almost 2,000 hectares of Southern Ontario wetlands lost each year from 2011 to 2015. And that was nearly triple the estimated annual losses from 2000 to 2011. In the Greater Toronto Area, where I'm based today, around 90% of the original wetlands are gone, which is stunning to think about. And when I think about the wetlands that are still managing to eke out an existence in Toronto, it really gives me a sense of how important it is to preserve them. Because in my experience, the life and the biodiversity and the healthy features that we're still fortunate to find in small patches around Toronto, they're almost always associated with wetlands. And in Ontario overall, when we look at this, the accumulation of those those losses that I've described, that amounts to an overall rate of loss is amongst the highest recorded on the planet. Many factors cause wetland loss, including land conversion for development, pollution from industrial agriculture, and climate change, as I mentioned, all of which are exacerbated by a recent trend of weakening provincial wetland protections. And looking at them, at some of those weakened protections in a bit more detail, numerous changes to provincial wetland policies have severely weakened protections for wetlands across Ontario. Conservation authorities have been undermined. A revised wetland evaluation system leaves significant wetlands at risk. There's now broad ministerial powers to override provincial wetland protections, and the growth plan and its broader wetlands protections have been revoked. And maybe if we're to go by some of the recent changes in policy, perhaps wetlands aren't so significant for everyone after all. To give you a bit more, to dive into a bit more detail on some of these recent changes, the Ministry of Natural Resources quietly abandoned their wetland conservation strategy, which had provided a critical framework of wetland conservation targets and actions, including a goal of halting and reversing wetland loss by 2030. That's gone. The MNR also introduced a new and significantly weakened Ontario wetland evaluation system, which makes it much harder for many wetlands to achieve and maintain provincially significant status and the high level of protections that affords. Now, over 22,000 hectares of wetlands across Southern Ontario might be at risk of losing their provincially significant wetland status and protection due to those changes. Overall, it seems to give the impression that top-down decisions are being favored over local perspectives. And so to give you a sense of the changes that create that impression, we've seen changes to the Conservation Authorities Act and its regulations in 2020, 2022, and 2024. They've all significantly undermined local conservation authorities' ability to do sound land use planning that protects wetlands, and granted the Ministry of Natural Resources additional power to override conservation authorities' decisions. Changes to the Planning Act in 2020 specified that the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing can use Ministers' Zoning Orders, or MZOs as they're referred to approve developments that are not consistent with provincial planning policies, which could impede the strict protection of provincially significant wetlands. It's important to note and to recall where a number of these authorities came from in the first place. And so these conservation authorities were actually established under the Conservation Authorities Act as a direct response to the devastating 1954 Hurricane Hazel, which caused widespread flooding and claimed 81 lives across the province, with the goal of becoming watershed managers and balancing urban planning with environmental protection. So that was the point of conservation authorities. So that was the genesis for the creation of conservation authorities. And to see their powers be so undermined in the face of increasing flooding just feels really counterintuitive. Another change that has weakened provincial wetland protections is the removal of the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, which was revoked in October just last year. This was replaced by the provincial planning statement, which didn't carry forward the broad protections offered for wetlands within the Greater Golden Horseshoe. As a result, over half and about 160,000 hectares of the remaining wetlands in the Greater Golden Horseshoe are now at risk. So what's the solution? Most immediately, we need more local protections. And we'll hear more from Sarah about this very, very shortly, which I'm really looking forward to. In the immediate and the medium term, what's really important is that we're building a really broad and inclusive grassroots movement of people across Ontario who believe that wetlands, like other natural ecosystems, should be conserved for future generations and to protect the species, the biodiversity, and the benefits that they provide to communities all around them. In the medium and long term, we need to reverse these provincial changes and bring about new policies that will protect the wetlands that remain and crucially respect Indigenous rights and empower local communities. And if you've reached this far, thank you very, very much for your attention. And I hope that we can continue to have conversations with many of you if you're interested in acting locally in your own communities. And I'm very, very grateful for your time. And I'll be available for questions and discussions after we've heard from Sarah. Thank you very much. And over to you, Sarah.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Shane, for sharing so much of that awesome information that is, again, in our new story map, which Leslie put the link in the chat, and we'll also be sure to include that in the follow-up email that you'll all be getting after this webinar in a few days. I'm just in the process of resetting up my slides, if you'll bear with me for a second. I'm going to assume it's sharing as it should be, unless somebody tells me otherwise.
That's good.
So, great. Thank you so much, Leslie. So yeah, as Shane said, one of the most immediate ways that we can really work together to help protect wetlands in Ontario is by establishing those strong local protections for these incredible ecosystems. And that's where Ontario Nature's new report, this Wetland Conservation for Local Planning Authorities, can come in. And Leslie, if you could add the link to the chat for that report as well, that would be fantastic. And we'll also circulate the link again in that follow-up email. There'll be links to all the resources we talk about, so you don't have to worry about keeping track of them. So yeah, so developed with the hopes of encouraging and empowering municipalities and conservation authorities to really use all the tools they have available to protect local wetlands. We think this report could also be a useful tool and a resource for community members like yourselves who are interested in protecting wetlands and maybe looking for ways that you can advance local wetland protections. So I'm going to spend a bit of time giving a bit of a teaser into the report and how I think it could be useful and hope it can be useful for local grassroots advocacy. One of the other strategies that Shane mentioned is so important. Before I go too far, though, I just want to take a minute to acknowledge that creating this report was a big team effort led by Ontario Nature, but supported by many others. Of course, we gave a big thank you to our wonderful funders at the start of the session tonight, and we're also really grateful for all of the reviewers who read through our early draft and provided some really insightful feedback. We worked especially closely with Cambium Indigenous Professional Services to reflect Indigenous rights, perspectives, and priorities throughout the report. I'll also note here that the report uses the term wise practices rather than best practices, which more people might be familiar with. And that was at the advice of our colleagues from Cambium Indigenous Professional Services to better align with the values and principles that are common among many Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island. And this was because the term best kind of incorrectly suggests that there's this clear and static hierarchy of what practices are the best, with no room for change or contextual nuance, which is a way of thinking that's more aligned with Western colonial perspectives. And there's a text box on the second page of the report for anyone who's interested in learning a bit more about that terminology choice, or I'm happy to speak to it a bit more in the Q&A if you want. But for now, I just wanted to acknowledge that decision in case people hadn't seen that terminology before. Moving into a bit of an overview of what you can find in this report, if you were to read through it, it's split into 4 main sections. First, we give a bit of an overview of the many ways that wetlands are valued and the different benefits that they provide, followed by a summary of recent changes to provincial policy that have left wetlands across Ontario at risk of being damaged or destroyed by development. And our intention with these sections was really to set the stage for why it's so important that municipalities and conservation authorities ensure that their local policies are protecting wetlands in their jurisdiction. And these sections capture a lot of the similar topics to what Shane was speaking about earlier. Then the bulk of the report highlights a bunch of examples from Southern Ontario municipalities and conservation authorities that have already put policies in place that ensure local wetlands are well protected. And for each example, we explain what the policy is and why we think it's a wise practice. The examples in the report are certainly not the only examples of effective wetland conservation led by local planning authorities. But they do showcase some of the great work that's already being done and that we'd love to see more planning authorities do in their own communities. Then we provide a short section with some tips and tools for building networks of support for local wetland conservation, including a suggestion that municipalities and conservation authorities may want to look for opportunities to work collaboratively with interested local groups or other organizations to help increase their success and impact for wetlands. And I'll speak to that a little bit later on. But first, I wanted to take some time to talk about some of the wise practice examples that are featured in the report. So examples are sorted into 7 different themes or categories, and these categories span a range of different approaches to protecting wetlands, like reducing wetland loss and degradation due to development by prohibiting or restricting development in wetlands, requiring wetlands to be evaluated to determine if the wetland meets criteria for provincially significant status and protection before making any development decisions, since many wetlands across Ontario are still unevaluated, and setting out specific limitations and requirements for developments that are next to wetlands so that the impacts from those adjacent developments don't have as much of an impact on the nearby ecosystems. We also have examples related to building meaningful relationships and partnerships with Indigenous peoples, recognizing again the importance of creating space for Indigenous leaderships in decisions affecting the land, air, and water these communities have lived with and stewarded since time immemorial. There are also examples around accounting for wetlands as natural assets. And by that, I mean better accounting for some of those kind of more financially tangible or infrastructure benefits that wetlands can provide, like flood mitigation that Shane was talking about. And that's so these services can be more readily considered in decision making, recognizing the value of these kind of more economically grounded or more practical arguments for local decision makers who might be balancing many different competing priorities and needs in their communities. Second to last here, we have policies and practices around managing and stewarding wetlands and public ownership. So different approaches to helping keep these ecosystems healthy when they are actually owned by the municipality or conservation authority. And lastly, supporting private wetland stewardship efforts, recognizing that a lot of Southern Ontario is held by private landowners who might benefit from having some financial or technical support to help take care of wetlands on their property. Now, there's a lot of examples and a lot of categories, and I won't be getting into all of them tonight, but I will highlight 3 different types of examples I thought might be most interesting to you all on the call today to just kind of show a bit of the range of what the report covers. And the first example I want to talk about focuses on setting strong policies to protect wetlands from development. And one municipality that's really leading the way in this regard is the city of Guelph. So Guelph has established strict protections for the majority of wetlands that are larger than half a hectare, which is about the size of a football field. Through their official plan and zoning bylaw, the city only allows a short list of low-impact activities in wetlands and other natural areas that they've included in their natural heritage system. And that significantly reduces the likelihood that any more of these areas would be lost in the future within the city. Quinte Conservation, the County of Peterborough, and the City of Richmond Hill are also featured in the report as strong examples of local planning authorities that have set strict restrictions and protections for wetlands. Next, I have an example from the County of Brant highlighting the work that they're doing to build meaningful partnerships and relationships with Indigenous peoples. So as we've been talking about throughout the presentation, and as we all likely know here on the call, Indigenous peoples' ways of living have thrived have sustained thriving ecosystems, that included human communities for millennia prior to the arrival of European settlers. To continue to exclude indigenous peoples and their traditional practices from the lands and waters not only violates their constitutional treaty and inherent rights and further perpetuates the harms of settler colonialism, but also undermines the health of our shared environment. Efforts to protect and conserve natural areas, including wetlands, must also create space for Indigenous leaders to advance revitalization of their cultures, traditional practices, and reconnection with the land, air, and water for the benefit of these communities and for all life. So the County of Brant's official plan commits to upholding Indigenous constitutional treaty and inherent rights, supported by specific action-oriented policies, like protecting any natural areas local Indigenous communities have identified as significant, facilitating the return of natural areas to Indigenous ownership and stewardship where that's feasible and where that's something the community wants, and creating space and capacity for Indigenous peoples and communities to participate in land planning decisions. And this example really shows how Brant has worked to move towards taking meaningful action to advance reconciliation among peoples and ecosystems. The town of Midland and City of Toronto are also featured in the report for their commitments to building positive relationships with Indigenous peoples. Lastly, I wanted to highlight an example of how local planning authorities, like municipalities and conservation authorities, can conserve wetlands by supporting the efforts of private landowners. I thought this might be of particular interest to any folks here who might own a farm or another larger rural property, or if any of you might know someone who does. So private landowners, for example, within the Grand River watershed and who are looking to care for wetlands on their property can apply for funding through the Grand River Conservation Authority's Rural Water Quality Program. Some of the projects that are eligible for funding through this program that are most directly tied to wetland conservation and restoration include funding specifically for ecosystem restoration or creation, so that could be for wetlands or other kinds of ecosystems, tree planting initiatives, funding to help keep livestock out of sensitive wetland ecosystems and waterways, which helps keep those ecosystems healthy by reducing degradation caused by trampling or animal waste that's entering the system. And there's also funding for the development of nutrient management plans, which means creating those more strategic and targeted fertilization schedules for crops so that there's less fertilizer pollution entering nearby wetlands and waters, while still ensuring that crops are receiving all the nutrients they need to be able to grow and be productive and support people's livelihoods and all the people who need to eat here in Ontario. So this program is provided with support from several municipal partners, including Dufferin, Haldimand, Oxford, and Wellington counties, the County of Brant again, and the region of Waterloo. Since it launched in 1996, the Grand River Conservation Authority has distributed over $20 million and supported about 6,500 water quality and environmental improvement projects through this program. And they also have a story map, which showcases some of the great work funded through this program, including several projects that have directly benefited wetlands. And overall, just a great example of how municipalities, the Conservation Authority, and private landowners are working together for wetlands. I'll also highlight that many other conservation authorities also provide these kinds of supports, including the Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority, Nottawasaga Valley Conservation Authority, and Toronto and Region Conservation Authority, just to name a few of them. And some municipalities also offer stewardship grants to varying degrees. And one example of that is the Township of Havelock, Belmont, Methuen, which is also featured in the report. So those are just 3 examples of wise practices featured in the report, with plenty more where they came from. And on the topic of collaboration, though, kind of from that last slide, I wanted to circle back to that final section of the report I mentioned, where we've encouraged planning authorities to look for opportunities to collaborate with all kinds of groups, from local Indigenous peoples, of course, to universities and colleges, to local environmental groups, or other larger organizations like Ontario Nature perhaps, where the opportunities arise to do so. We've made this recommendation recognizing that there's lots of passionate people like you, those of you who are on the call with us today, beyond the kind of municipal and conservation authority staff, and that these other passionate people might be willing to share their time and knowledge to help protect wetlands and other natural areas. Of course, as well, it's often the case that many hands make for lighter work. So one example that we feature in this section of the report is from Hamilton, where there's been longstanding collaboration among the municipality, conservation authorities, and several local community groups. And this collaboration, sorry, has facilitated detailed natural areas inventories for every 10 years since 1993. Many of these groups have also supported the development of an ambitious biodiversity action plan, which was endorsed by the city last year. And this example just really goes to show how working together between the different planning authorities and local groups can advance shared goals and lead to more success for nature. This section of the report also features an example of collaboration among Manoa Key Land Trust, which is an Indigenous women-led land trust organization, the Oak Ridges Moraine Land Trust, the Greenbelt Foundation, and Cambium Indigenous Professional Services. And this collaboration is really centered around coordinating the different groups' wants and needs to consult with Williams Treaty First Nations on various initiatives, with the goal of supporting and facilitating the participation of interested First Nations in these kinds of initiatives without those nations becoming overwhelmed with too many separate but related asks. And this just goes to show another way of working together that can be really beneficial in kind of moving these shared goals forward. And yes, just to emphasize, working together can lead to some larger impacts when we're working together towards a shared goal. So how might all of this information be useful for community members like yourselves who really care about local wetlands? First of all, like the story map and all the information that Shane shared with us earlier, there's a lot of information also in this report that can help to equip you with strong arguments in favor of protecting wetlands, from the diverse values and benefits they provide to that trend of weakening provincial protections that makes local action all the more important. This can be really helpful, we hope, in conversations with local decision makers and all kinds of people that you might be talking to about the importance of wetlands. Sorry. There we go. Second, if you are interested in actively engaging with your municipality about the importance of protecting wetlands, you could share this report with them, or consider using some of the wise practice examples to inform what kind of improvements you might ask to see in your community, just depending how involved and how actively engaged you want to be and have time to be. And if this is something you're interested in, but you're not super sure where to start, Ontario Nature has also published some tip sheets for local action in recent years that might be helpful. And Leslie, if you can put those links in the chat as well, that'd be great. I think this is one of the last links I'll ask you to put in there. And again, they'll also be in the follow-up email that you'll be getting after the webinar. I'll highlight on this point that we did promote this report directly with municipal and conservation authority staff across Ontario, actually on the 20th of last month in February. And that session was really well attended. So that gave me a lot of hope, and I hope gives others a lot of hope that community leaders across the province are genuinely interested in how they can protect wetlands, and they may be very happy to have some support and encouragement from local community members as well. The third point I'll make here is that you might get to learn a little bit more about some potential funding opportunities to support your own wetland conservation and restoration efforts, which again may be especially relevant for those of you who are rural landowners. And as an added little bonus here at the end, you might actually get to learn where your community is already doing a great job. And for me, at least, it's always really nice to get those pockets of good news when it can sometimes feel like those of us who really care about protecting natural ecosystems are fighting a bit of an uphill battle. So those are some of the key uses we see for this report and how it might be useful. But if you have other ideas, please do feel free to share them with us and the rest of the group using the chat. Or of course, you can also email me with any comments or questions after tonight as well. And Leslie, I'll ask you to add my email into the chat if you don't mind, and it'll also be in those follow-up emails so you'll know where to find me as well. With that, we have wrapped up the presentation portion of the evening. And I really, again, as we've said so many times, thank you so much for coming and for listening and spending your evening with us. I will stop sharing my screen now, and Shane and I will happily field any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much, Sarah and Shane. Very interesting, very informative, and some great work that your team has done on the Wise Practices report and on the story map. So great work. I hope everybody gets a chance to check those out. Just a reminder, if you do have questions for Sarah and Shane, please put those in the Q&A session, and I will read them to them. So that's the way that we're going to do it. You'll write it in the Q&A, and I will read it out loud. So feel free to put those in, and we already have a couple in there, so I will get started. The first question is about the relative carbon storage by different kinds of wetlands. So this person is saying someone has told them that swamps and marshes don't have a lot of carbon sequestration. So is it as important, I guess, to fight for swamps and marshes as opposed to bogs and fens?
I can jump on that. I would say absolutely. It is just as important to fight for swamps and marshes as well as bogs and fens. The person you're speaking to may be right to an extent that bogs and fens have these really deep layers of partially broken down, partially decomposed plant matter called peat. So they just have absolutely incredible amounts of carbon stored in their soils. But that is not at all to negate the value of swamps and marshes. They also store a lot of carbon. There's plants growing there as well, and starting to slowly sequester carbon both in the different trees and grasses and things that are there, and moving that into the soil as well, though just maybe to a slightly lesser extent of carbon being stored in the soil than a bog or a fen. But also just for the fact that different ecosystems provide different values, and then carbon storage is not the be all end all of why we would want to protect a wetland. They, as Shane said, marshes are incredibly valuable for filtration services and flood mitigation, and they provide different kinds of habitat for different kinds of species than a bog or a marsh would. So plenty of good reasons to be standing up for your swamps and marshes. And yeah, bogs and fens are wonderful, amazing ecosystems, but not the only wonderful, amazing ones.
Thanks, Sarah. Okay, the next question is, what effects have the introduction of Phragmites has Phragmites had on wetlands in southern Ontario?
I can give that a try and see how I do, and you can compliment Sarah. I thought that was a great answer there you gave for the last question. And when we're in the middle of a global biodiversity crisis, it really is so important to be protecting nature for nature's sake, irrespective of the carbon in one ecosystem or another ecosystem. I think that's a really important point you made. I think maybe a short answer to your question is that their introduction has contributed to, I would say, a loss of native biodiversity in wetlands, including through, in particular, outcompeting and crowding out native plants and wildlife species. They can also disrupt the delicate balance of wetlands, and in particular, for example, the flow of water through wetlands can be disrupted by their introduction, and even dry stands can increase the risk of fires in and around wetlands. So those are just some of the the quite negative and quite significant implications of their introduction. Sarah, do you have anything to add to that? Is that a reasonable summary?
I think you've pretty well covered it. Just
Thank you.
has that real tendency to come in and push all of the native plants out, which has a ton of kind of negative fallout, as Shane mentioned.
Great. Thanks, guys. Just a reminder, I see a few things coming in the chat. So if you do have questions for the panelists, please put that in the Q&A. I have my eyes on the Q&A right now, so it's harder to check the chat. The next question is some folks at the Saugeen Preservation Society who are fighting some gravel pits, and they comment that applicants are only required to study the natural heritage in the actual footprint of the pit, but they're concerned about the natural heritage around that. So can you suggest any resources or actions they can take to assist in assessing and protecting the wetlands and their critters and flora?
That is a fantastic question. Thank you, Shane. And one I'm probably not going to have a perfect answer for right now, because if the policies only require certain things, then that is what the developer ultimately has to do. But I wouldn't let that discourage you from participating in any kind of opportunity to be a public voice on this. So most local land use planning, sorry if I don't fumble my words too much, those processes do have opportunities for public consultation. So if you can look in your municipal website, then they should have postings at key moments to provide comment, and you can raise your concerns there about the adjacent wetlands, because usually most municipalities, and it's hard again without knowing the specifics of the municipality that you're in, but most will have their natural heritage policies say within 30 meters you have to see, if there's development within 30 meters of a natural heritage feature like a wetland, then there needs to be some study of the impacts it may have on the adjacent wetland. So I think it's worth raising your concerns, and with myself not knowing too much about the specifics, I think that's the best answer I can give right now. But I would also encourage you to reach out to me by email, and if you have any other links or other information or more specific questions, then we can continue a conversation. I'll see if there's any other support I can offer as well.
And I would just also remind folks that those tip sheets that we linked in the chat and we will include in the follow-up email do have some really good tips for organizing around an issue and for talking to your local decision makers and so on. So I encourage you again to look at those. Okay, next question is about the somebody has inside knowledge of your grant funding that you're hoping for, and maybe wondering if you can speak to that a little bit. Maybe not everyone knows about that, but
no, that's fine. I can probably take that. I think, you know, Ontario Nature has a long-term focus on wetlands in Ontario. If I'm not mistaken, Leslie and Sarah, I think it goes back to about 19. Well, hello. It's been well over 50 years. I mean, certainly that Ontario Nature's been working on this. So like that's a roundabout way of saying to your question, Susan. Our intention is to continue working on wetlands for a long time. They're really critical to the natural world and to communities right across Ontario. So we will be continuing to work on wetlands. We're hoping to get some additional funding, as you're alluding to, in the next kind of couple of weeks and months. But irrespective if we get one particular piece of funding or another particular piece of funding, we're going to continue to stay focused on protecting wetlands and uplifting local solutions to wetland conservation. So that's not going anywhere. So any opportunity that we can have, and I see there's a few questions kind of related to this topic, any opportunity for Sarah or I or Leslie to actually connect and support different groups and at least have conversations with folks about the amazing work you're doing and any kind of experiences that we've had that could add value to your local work, we're absolutely here to continue to do that. So hopefully Susan will have a little bit of additional funding, but irrespective, we're going to be continuing to focus on wetland conservation for the long term. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Shane. And this is, as you alluded to, the next question is a little bit related, but is there an opportunity for Ontario Nature to collaborate with naturalist nature groups on efforts to protect wetlands in working with our municipality? So you can maybe be specific about what groups can do if they have that request.
Yeah, I can jump on that quickly with the quick answer of absolutely, as you could see from our nodding heads and from Shane's last answer as well. If you're engaged on a particular issue, and yeah, I think we've seen a few people asking about their specific issues in their communities, don't hesitate at all to reach out. As I said, my email will be available. Should be somewhere in the chat, though maybe buried now. It'll be in the email. And to just reach out and let us know what you could use some help with, and we'll see what we can do to be able to support. I think
And
that answers.
that's a fantastic answer, I think, Sarah. And just to say, Kate, I'm based right here in Toronto myself. I'd love to talk more about that and see how we could help. Absolutely, yeah.
Wonderful, thanks. And anybody, Nature Network members, specifically, if you want to connect with me and I can connect you with Sarah, Shane, you can also take that route or just deal with them directly. Either way is fine. Okay, that's a good question. How do we combat the arguments of the housing crisis is such that we need to build more and the environmental regulations are blocking housing? We
That
need
is a
housing,
fantastic question.
You want to go for that, Sarah?
I can start with it, and if I miss something, I'll be
Great.
looking at you,
Brilliant.
Shane. Yeah, so I think the first answer for me that comes to mind, if you're dealing with people who are thinking really practically that we are in a housing crisis and that is important, um, that building on a wetland is not maybe the best place for a house. Um, if you're thinking about a wetland, a lot of times they are in areas where water naturally gathers. And when we're already experiencing a lot of flooding, I know a lot of places where we're experiencing some recently with all of the snow that we had that was melting and the ground is frozen and kind of struggling to absorb that water. If your house is somewhere where water would naturally gather, that's where the water is still going to go. So it might not end so well for those basements and people who have things in those basements. And I think another kind of important note that we can make is just that there are other places to build. That building gentle density in existing communities is going to be a more affordable and a quicker way to get houses built. These areas are already serviced with all the kind of plumbing and electricity that also goes into building communities, and can be closer to transit and other kinds of amenities that people want to be close to. So that can be another argument in favor of maybe leaving our natural spaces alone. And actually, the Alliance of a Livable Ontario has a great resource out around that. It's called Five Ways Home, and it talks a lot about addressing the housing crisis while balancing environmental priorities as well. So I will maybe pass things to Shane and also try and find that report quickly so I can put the link in case any of you want that.
Okay, well, I thought that was a really good answer, Sarah, and I might look to you to answer the next question as well, or not as well, but there's a next question that I think you have a real
Okay,
expertise in.
yeah.
But
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, just very briefly, thanks so much, Leslie. I think that was a really good answer, Sarah, and I think like a big part of it is is responding to that question with a lot of empathy, because as you pointed out, Sarah, like we are in a housing crisis right now, but we're not in a housing crisis because of wetlands. Wetlands didn't cause this housing crisis, right? And I think that there are politicians out there, without naming names, who sometimes like to pit houses, homes against nature and the natural world and a healthy environment. There's no need to be pitting them against each other. With good planning, we can have housing for all, and we can have a healthy natural world. there's no need to pit them against each other. And I'm very skeptical when I hear those things being put up against each other. It's not a zero-sum game. We can have both, and we really have to have both. So yeah, it's a really good question. It was an excellent answer, Sarah. Thank you.
And I think another point that is in that Alliance for Livable Ontario report is that we have enough space within existing boundaries to build the homes that we need. So we don't need to sprawl them out and build them on top of wetlands and forests and so on. Okay, so the next question is with the new week OWES, which is Ontario Wetland Evaluation System classification, will conservationists and consultants be obligated to use the new guidelines? So would a specific area be classified with the previous system and not with the new guidelines?
Yes, so is that the question you were alluding to there, Shane? Yeah. So that is my understanding, yes, that you do have to use the new system, which is unfortunate because it is a lot harder to get to that provincially significant designation, which then affords the strict provincial protections that we don't build on provincially significant wetlands or PSWs in Southern Ontario especially. So I mean that kind of answers the question is that yes, people are stuck with this less than best system.
For a new
Yeah,
or reevaluation, you'd have
for
to
a
use
newer
the
yeah.
system. An existing evaluation, unless contested, remains.
Yes. Yes, thank you, Leslie. And Leslie does know a lot about this as well. So thank you for jumping in on that one. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks, guys. Next question. We've got two more questions in here, and I think we'll take those two, and then we probably be good to wrap up questions. So some municipalities and conservation authorities appear to be ignoring the preservation of wetlands despite having specific language to the contrary in their official plans. Can anything be done to change this behavior?
I'll give that a try. Yeah, I'll give that a try. Thanks, sir. You know, it's an excellent question, and there's probably a couple of good answers to it as well. So I think part of the answer, at least, is that at the local level, well, as with any layer of government, but in particular, I guess at the local level, at the municipal level, there's a high level of accountability to their constituents, you know. And I think if you're living in a municipality in which you think they're not living up to your expectations when it comes to protecting wetlands around you, I think it's important, even opportunity to contact those local kind of officials directly and to make it clear to them that, you know, it's really important as a constituent and as a member of that municipality, a member of that community, that that your local wetlands are protected, and really making clear why that's really important to you environmentally, socially, economically, culturally, and the huge benefits that it provides, and the really, really wise investment of resources it is to conserve local wetlands. So I think a part of the answer then is kind of really getting in touch with your local officials. And I know sometimes that can be a bit daunting, but you know, at the municipal level, there's less barriers to connecting with your local officials. And I know Leslie has provided some really fantastic tools and tips and tricks for how to do that if you had any questions. But I think that's a part of the puzzle. I think another part of the puzzle too is seeing who's active in your communities already, because Ontario Nature is very unfortunate to have around 150 groups in our nature network, which I think shows the breadth and depth of kind of local activism when it comes to wetlands and nature right across the province. And I'd be surprised if there's not someone or some local group near you that are like-minded people who are doing who are similarly concerned at the loss of wetlands around them. And I guess another part of it is contacting organizations like Ontario Nature to see if we have an opportunity to collaborate and put a spotlight on the really important concerns that you have as well. So I think those are some of how you can engage with your officials. Whether you can change their behavior permanently over time, I don't know, but I think certainly you can influence their decisions when it comes to wetlands. I think that's for certain. So I just really encourage you not to feel disempowered because we all do actually have a voice when it comes to the nature all around us, and we are empowered to act, and you're certainly not alone, and you know, you have power as an engaged community member. Thanks for that question. It's a really good one.
Thanks, Shane. Yeah, and just as part of the engagement with your municipality is taking those opportunities, like Sarah mentioned, when there is a development proposal, they do, especially if it requires a change to the official plan, there will be public engagement opportunities, and reaching out to your counselors and everybody at those times is a really good time and is really critical. Okay, next question. Is it possible to persuade farming landowners to protect wetlands and wetland buffers on their land?
I think, not coming from a rural community or rural background myself, I would say yes. I think farmers really care about the land. They really, their livelihood depends on the health of their land and their ecosystems around them. So I would say yeah, absolutely. Agricultural community is a huge ally potentially in a lot of this work, and they do a lot of fantastic things to take care of the land. So I think just highlighting some of those benefits and for what they're doing as well can be compelling arguments. If you're talking to people that you know that maybe have a farm and could be doing some things differently to help support both their agricultural operations and the wetlands and other ecosystems around them. One of the things I had mentioned on the kind of funding side from Grand River Conservation Authority, for example, around the nutrient management plan, really controlling the amount of fertilizer that goes into a farming operation can stop there from being as much nutrient pollution entering different ecosystems, which is fantastic for those ecosystems and really helps take care of the environment. But at the same time means then that farmer doesn't have to spend as much money on fertilizer that just runs into adjacent ecosystems and doesn't end up feeding their crops anyways. So really finding those opportunities to work with the environment and the farming operation that agricultural communities they're relying on for their livelihood, and supporting the rest of Ontarians that rely on food as well, and finding that balance is a really important way to kind of speak with farming communities around the roles that they can have in protecting our environment as well.
I might
Yeah.
just give a shout out. That
Oh.
was a brilliant answer, Sarah. As always. I might just give a shout out, for example, to one of our close partners in the National Farmers Union Ontario, in particular, you know, to really highlight the incredible work that they're doing to put in place genuine ecological practices in farming right across the province, and throughout their kind of where their members are doing really wonderful farming right across the province. And so there are just some really fantastic examples of farmers who are showing incredible leadership on preserving wetlands, preserving other natural ecosystems, and doing so in a way that really benefits local communities and respects Indigenous rights. And I've been incredibly impressed, for example, by the National Farmers Union over a number of years, in particular, and we're lucky to have a really close partnership with them. So yeah, there are really good examples of leadership in the farming community. If you look for them. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, another great resource, and I see Janet pop that in the chat, is ALICE, or the Alternative Land Use Services or system, whatever the S is. It is another great resource for good farming practices, and like some of the programs that Sarah mentioned, the stewardship related programs that conservation authorities or stewardship councils or municipalities might have, you know, connecting farmers with those programs so that it's easier for them, that there's some funding for them to do some of that good work to protect the areas around their farms. Okay, so that's all the questions that I'm seeing in the Q&A. So I think that's it. If anybody has any, I'll give you, 30 more seconds to pop them in the Q&A. I'm just kind of quickly trying to look at the chat to see if any questions got in there. an invitation to speak. Well, you'll have to you'll have to reach out to Sarah about that in her email. Yeah, so thank you very much to Sarah and Shane for providing all that information and that background. Like we said, this is being recorded. We will share the recording and as well as the links to all those resources in a follow-up email. It should be probably about 2 days before you get that. So watch your inbox for it. And again, feel free to reach out to myself or to Sarah to connect with specific issues or any questions you might have or something that you thought of. You think of a question in 5 minutes from now, that's okay. You can still email it to us and we'll do our best to answer. Okay, and so thank you everybody for being here.